What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can always follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Make sure to subscribe below if you have not already. Appreciate you joining me today. Let's jump in and get started right away. I want to talk today about the Packers' weapons, primarily wide receivers, but also tight ends and running backs, and sort of see, all right, departure of Devante Adams, departure of MVS, departure of EQ to a lesser extent, a lot lesser extent. What does the sort of target share look like this upcoming season? You know, trying to replace Devante Adams, trying to replace Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and assuming Rodgers has at least a similar type of season, how do those targets and yards and catches and touchdowns sort of spread out and sort of, you know, if we're looking at a prediction, projection, expectation, whatever you want to view it as, what do those look like for each of the players, both returning and, of course, all the newbies as well? You've got an incoming cast of Sammy Watkins, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, obviously Samori Toure. You've got Robert Tonyan returning from injury. Amari Rodgers could take a jump. So there's a lot of moving pieces within this Packers weapons group. And I really wanted to try to suss out, if you will, what those targets and yards and touchdowns and everything could look like. And I really want to get your comments on this as well. So make sure to comment below, because I'd really love to know, do you think any of these seem outlandish? Are they off? Are they on? Are they off maybe just by a little bit? Are they extremely off? Because as I went through this, and we'll get to a lot of this in just a second, I didn't think any of the numbers seemed that outrageously off. I felt like all of these were doable. So we'll get to all of that in just a moment. But before we understand that, we also need to understand what Green Bay has lost, and specifically Devante Adams and MVS, and what an Aaron Rodgers season has looked like in the Matt LaFleur era. So let's start with Devante Adams first. His last 3 seasons in the Matt LaFleur era look like this: 83 catches, 997 yards, and 5 touchdowns. 115 catches, 1,374 yards, and 18 touchdowns. 123 catches, 1,553 yards, and 11 touchdowns. The average Devante Adams season over the last 3 years: 107 catches, 1,308 yards, and 11 touchdowns. That is a lot to replace, to say the least. Not even to mention how teams game planned for Devante Adams, double team, triple team Devante Adams. All of that is in the equation as well. But that's just what he produced from a statistical standpoint. That also doesn't include all the pass interferences he got. You get the point. He's going to be a very tough player to replace. How about MVS? His 3 seasons with Matt LaFleur: 26 catches, 452 yards, and 2 touchdowns. 33 catches, 690 yards, and 6 touchdowns. 26 catches, 430 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The average MVS season in the Matt LaFleur era: 28 catches, 524 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So just to recap, the average Adams and MVS season: Devante, 107 catches, 1,308 yards, and 11 touchdowns. MVS, 28 catches, 524 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Basically, 135 catches, about 1,832 yards, and about 15 touchdowns. That is a lot to replace with those 2 players leaving. Before we get to our sort of projections, I also think it's very important to look at what Aaron Rodgers has done in the Matt LaFleur era. What does an average Aaron Rodgers season look like? We know that 2 of them are MVP seasons, but here were Rodgers' numbers over the last 3 seasons. 353 completions on 569 attempts, a 62% completion percentage, 4,002 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. That was in Matt LaFleur's first season. Next year, his first MVP under Matt LaFleur: 372 completions, 526 attempts, a 70.7% completion percentage, 4,299 yards, 48 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. And then last year, 366 completions, 531 attempts, 68.9% completion percentage, 4,115 yards, 37 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. By the way, it's remarkable that the average of those 3 seasons is almost identical to what he did a season ago. Neither here nor there, but fun fact nonetheless. The average: 364 completions, 542 attempts, 67.2% completion percentage, 4,139 yards, 37 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. So that is what a potential Aaron Rodgers season could look like. And today, for this, prediction, study, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to use that as the baseline, the average Aaron Rodgers season over the last 3 years. Now, clearly, there is reason to believe that it could be worse than that, right? That from an efficiency standpoint, without MVS and his ability to potentially stretch the field, without Devante Adams taking double and triple coverage at times, and just having a superstar stud wide receiver on the outside, that Rodgers' productivity, his efficiency, and his numbers could go down. You also could look at it as, all right, last year he had, 366 completions, 4,000 plus yards, 37 touchdowns. And he basically only played in 14 and a half games because the first game against the Saints was just an unmitigated nightmare. And they could have a game like that this season as well. But you usually don't expect Aaron Rodgers to have a game quite like that. He didn't play against the Chiefs, and he didn't play the second half against the Detroit Lions. So you could have actually more games for Aaron Rodgers, even if it's just the one extra game that he missed to due to Kansas City. Even if it's just that, he could have more numbers or at least more opportunities in that regard. So I'm going to say that his average over the last 3 years is at least a ballpark number for where his numbers could be this year. And maybe that's too much of an expectation for this offense, but I'm going to run with it anyway because, quite honestly, I don't think it's that out of the realm of possibility. So we're saying Rodgers is going to have 364 completions, 4,139 yards, 37 touchdowns, and 4 picks for this exercise. Probably not going to be exactly those numbers. Touchdowns maybe down a little bit. Interceptions probably up. Completion percentage probably down a little bit. But in the realm, I think those are going to be somewhere near the numbers for Rodgers this upcoming season. So let's go through player by player to see where their targets and yardage could potentially end up. So Allen Lazard last year, 40 catches, 513 yards, and 8 touchdowns in 15 games. So we missed a couple games last year. I think that you look at about a 25% increase for Allen Lazard. It's a little bit more than that on the yardage standpoint. I think his touchdowns remain the same. I don't think he goes up in touchdowns. I think 8 touchdowns is about right for Allen Lazard. So I'm going to say this season he goes from 40 catches to 51 catches, 513 yards to 700 yards, and that 8 touchdowns remains the same. So 51 for 708 touchdowns for Allen Lazard. That's my first projection. How about Randall Cobb? Randall Cobb last year in 12 games had 28 catches, 375 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Now, I think that 12 games is about right. I think that's probably what you would project Randall Cobb to play. However, I do think, A, he could play more games. B, I think he gets a little bit more of the share with Devante Adams not being there. So I'm going to say about a 1.25 or a 25% increase for Randall Cobb as well. I'm going to say 35 catches, 469 yards. I'm going to actually take 1 touchdown away. I just think 5 touchdowns for Randall Cobb in that sort of role last year was probably a little aggressive. So I'm going to say he loses 1 touchdown. I'm going to say he ends up at 4 touchdowns. So 35 catches, 469 yards, and 4 touchdowns for Randall Cobb. That might be a little bit low, but again, last year was 28, 375, and 5. So I think we're within the realm there of possibility. How about Aaron Jones? Last year, 52 catches, 391 yards, and 6 touchdowns. I'm going to keep him at that 52 catch number. I'm actually going to increase his yardage. I think he's going to do better from a yardage standpoint. I'm going to say 450 yards, but I'm going to say 4 touchdowns instead of 6. I think, again, for a running back, 6 receiving touchdowns is really freaking good. I think probably comes down to life a little bit. I'm going to say 4 receiving touchdowns instead of 6. So Jones 52 for 450 with 4 touchdowns. A.J. Dillon last year, 34 catches, 313 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I'm going to say that stays relatively the same. I'm going to move him up to 40 catches, 350 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So about 6 more catches, about 37 more yards, and 1 more touchdown. I still think his numbers last year are probably right around where he hits this year as well. I do think with Jones and Dillon, there could be a few more check down opportunities, just with not as much developing down the field. I do think they could look to use both of those players out of the backfield more without Devante Adams, but I'm not going to increase them too much. I think, again, Jones gets more yards. I think Dillon gets a few more catches, a few more yards, but I think both of those are in the right ballpark. Now, Robert Tonyan, I'm going back to 2020. In 2020, he had 52 catches, 586 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Coming off a torn ACL, I think those numbers are going to go down. So I'm going to say he's going to have 40 catches, which is still really good for a tight end, 420 yards and 5 touchdowns. So that's about 12 less catches, 166 less yards and 6 less touchdowns than he had in his breakout campaign. But we don't know how many games he's exactly going to play. And again, coming off of a torn ACL is a really tough thing. So I think those numbers are down a bit, but I do still think he's a weapon and a red zone threat in this offense. So I think 40 for 420 and 5 touchdowns feels about right for Robert Tonyan. How about Josiah DeGuara? Last year, he had 25 catches, 245 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I think that feels almost exactly right. Yes, I think there's a chance DeGuara could take a step. We've also seen DeGuara split time with, Dominique Daphne with the ones. So, I think that stat line, exactly what he had last year, is probably just about what he's going to have this year as well. So I'm keeping those numbers exactly the same. Mercedes Lewis, again, not a huge weapon here, but his average in the Matt LaFleur era-ish has been about 16 catches for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that seems about exactly right, so I'm penciling him in for 16, 160, and 2 once again. Last year, what I would consider like all of the rest, right? The random guys, your Kylan Hills, your Juwan Winfreys, your Equinemius St. Browns, your Tyler Davises, like all of the other guys, your non-primary receivers. All of those guys combined for 34 catches, 284 yards, and 0 touchdowns. I'm going to keep that the same. I'm going to say the random group of wide receivers that end up playing for some reason this season, or weapons, I should say, end up with 34 for 284 and no touchdowns once again. So that brings us with Lazard, Cobb, Jones, Dillon, Tonyan, DeGuara, Lewis, and your random guys to 293 completions, 3,078 yards, and 28 touchdowns. So if we're expecting Rodgers to have 364 completions, 4,139 yards, and 37 touchdowns, that leaves 71 catches, 1,061 yards, and 9 touchdowns still remaining. Now, I believe, and this could go in a variety of different ways, but for this, I'm going to say that Romeo Doubs, Amari Rodgers, Tyler Davis, Samori Toure, I'm going to say that they still end up in that other group, right? And you might say, listen, Amari could take a step, maybe, but there's a lot of wide receivers to fight for everything, right? You could say Romeo Doubs is going to do, he could be the guy, like maybe, but we just looked at the 4th rounders and how they've performed, and look at the recent 4th round picks, and like it, for the not only for the Packers but around the league, the 4th round wide receivers have not provided much in their rookie season. Gabe Davis was a bit of an outlier, but overall, I'm going to say Toure, Davis, Rodgers, Doubs, Juwan Winfrey, like Kylan Hill, Patrick Taylor, like any of those type of players, Dominique Daphne, are going to be included already in that random guys category where they had 34 catches for 284 yards and no touchdowns. So that leaves the 71 for 1,061 and 9 touchdowns for Christian Watson and Sammy Watkins. So I'm going to say Christian Watson is very similar to MVS's rookie year. MVS in his rookie year, 38 catches, 581 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, I want to be clear. I do not think these two are the same wide receiver. I'm not comparing MVS to Christian Watson, but I do think Watson could have a similar type of season as a rookie. I'm going to pencil in Watson for 36 catches, 596 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So 2 less catches than MVS had, about 15 more yards, but 4 more touchdowns. I also think we could see Watson get involved more as a running back, kick returner, etc., or maybe not running back, but like handed the ball. So I think he could do some things that MVS doesn't, but as a pure wide receiver, I'm saying 36, 596, and 6 touchdowns, which would leave Sammy Watkins with 35 catches, 465 yards, and 3 touchdowns. If you look at Sammy Watkins in 2021, he had 27 for 394 and 1 touchdown. Watkins in 20 had 37, 421, and 2 touchdowns. You might say, but Andy, now he has Aaron Rodgers. Well, guess what? He had Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes the last 2 seasons. It's not like he's actually been struggling to play with good quarterbacks, right? So I'm going to say 35, which would be just 2 less receptions than he had a season ago, 465, which would be more yards than he had in either of the last 2 seasons, and 3 touchdowns, which is what he had combined over the last 2 seasons. So I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility either. So where does that leave us? So that covers everything. That's all the yards, all the completions, all the touchdowns if Rodgers were to have his average season in the Matt LaFleur era. So from a reception standpoint, Aaron Jones leads the way with 52, Allen Lazard with 51, Tonyan and Dillon with 40 apiece, Christian Watson with 36, Randall Cobb with 35, Sammy Watkins with 35, the random miscellaneous players with 34, DeGuara with 25, Mercedes Lewis with 16. From a yardage standpoint, Lazard leads the way with 700, Christian Watson with 596, Randall Cobb with 469, Sammy Watkins with 465, Aaron Jones with 450, Robert Tonyan with 420, A.J. Dillon with 350, the random group with 284, DeGuara with 245, and Mercedes Lewis with 160. And from a touchdown standpoint, Lazard with 8, Watson with 6, Tonyan with 5, Cobb with 4, Jones with 4, Watkins and Dillon with 3, DeGuara and Lewis with 2, and the random miscellaneous players with none. So that is how everything sort of came out in this simulation, prediction, projection, whatever you want to call it. And again, I don't think anything is that totally crazy here. Just to recap it one more time in its totality, Aaron Jones, 52 catches, 450 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Allen Lazard, 51 catches, 700 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Tonyan, 40 catches, 420 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Dillon, 40 catches, 350 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Christian Watson, 36 catches, 596 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Randall Cobb, 35 catches, 469 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Sammy Watkins, 35 for 465 with 3. The random group, 34 for 284 with none. DeGuara, 25 with 245 and 2. And Lewis, 16 for 160 and 2. Again, I don't think any of those seem that incredibly crazy. Of course, it's going to work out in some different way just due to injuries and things like that. Somebody's going to step up. Somebody's going to have a poor season. All of that's going to happen. But I don't feel like in its total, like that any of those numbers, and even those numbers combined, would be that unheard of. Again, I expect Rodgers' efficiency probably to go down. I think his completion percentage is going to go down. Maybe his touchdowns go down a bit. Maybe his interceptions go up a bit. Maybe his yards go down a bit. But overall, if Rodgers is even anywhere in that realm, I think Green Bay still, I think all of those players can hit those numbers. And none of them are like, man, you just gave, Allen Lazard 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns. Good luck with that. Or, you gave a rookie, Christian Watson, 900 yards receiving. Good luck with that. I feel like all of these are within the realm of possibility. And that's with guys like Amari Rodgers and Romeo Doubs, who, who knows, Tyler Davis, who knows, if one of those guys steps up big, that could even increase your productivity and increase your efficiency. So again, my final thought here in my recap here is that I think all of these numbers are well within the realm of possibility. I think Green Bay can still have a very unique, very talented, and very diverse offense that is going to be tough for defenses simply because I don't think there's going to be one primary player that you can look at on every play and be like, all right, it's going to that guy. And we've talked about this a lot, but I think the ball is going to get moved around, spread out, and I'm hoping we're going to see Aaron Rodgers, the point guard, Aaron Rodgers, the distributor. I want to see him ball out, get it to the player who it's designed for, that the play can have success with, and just rip it and let those guys do the heavy lifting, because that, I think, is when Aaron Rodgers and this Matt LaFleur offense is at its absolute best. Thanks so much for joining me today. Always appreciate it. Of course, we'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.